Welcome to CooLife Podcast, brought to you by therealthingdating.com. www.therealthingdating.com.
Polydor Records for out scouting. This girl grabbed my bangs and ran my head right into the speaker.
Oh,
And everyone heard like this, yeah.
When we shot the scene in Good Will Hunting, I didn't know who most of these people were at the time. I mean, they weren't stars. It was Gus Van Sant that directed it. Gus Van Sant was on the floor with Matt Damon's character. I didn't even know who Matt Damon was at that time.
I'm Eva John. I'm a former candidate for local government. I was a children's television entertainer, and I love this world. And I believe we should take care of each other and have a lot of fun along the way. Welcome to CooLife. Here we go. And welcome to CooLife Podcast. I'm Eva John, and today we're sitting down with EARL Miller, art critic, writer, and basically our inside scoop of our society through the lens of art. EARL, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here, and I'm so glad to have this beautiful artistic view of our world and the way it works as an art critic viewing art, which I think is such an important part of our culture, of having something important to say with our lives, that our everyday workaday lives are made so much more special and beautiful by taking that step beyond regular work, beyond just being a being who goes home and eats a meal and gets ready to go and work again, that there's something more beautiful added to our experience. And knowing that art is there, and knowing that art can actually be given some type of measurement, some type of value, and a quantitative / qualitative assessment as seen by someone like yourself as an art critic. And EARL, just as a start, can you tell me, how did you enter the world of art as an art critic?
Oh, okay. Well, it started in this way, which is not always the usual path, but I was a painting major at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. And in my senior year, I met a couple of people that were doing art writing, art criticism in small journals and kind of quasi-academic journals and stuff. And I thought I was kind of interested in that. I was interested also sort of in organizing and putting on shows as well as making art. So it all sort of worked, that I might also be interested in a peripheral field of art making, in other words, criticism. And yeah, I just started shortly after I graduated. I moved to Toronto and also thought of it as a potential source of income, which I realized quickly it was only going to be very minor. But so thought of it that way, and then was lucky to publish in a couple of small magazines, and it sort of took off from there. But yeah, I come from an art background, and not sort of an academic, so to speak, background.
That's wonderful that you have the inside view as an artist. And, truly, when, other artists, or when anyone creates something and then realizes that they're going to hear feedback from someone, it's beautiful to know that your feedback is coming from a place of genuine experience and understanding. Now, I'm wondering, there's been so much constant change and flux in the world of art. You could say really for centuries, for
Yes.
millennia. And in our century, in our time, we've gone through the pandemic. And there's so many things in industry and society that have a pre-pandemic and a post-pandemic effect. Have you witnessed and seen what is the difference between the art world as you've seen it pre-pandemic and now post-pandemic?
Yeah, good question. It sort of stopped, per se. I mean, people's incomes stopped too, and so forth. But to me, there hasn't been a dramatic effect. I mean, there's been some work about containment or being in spaces and things like that. There's been a fair bit of kind of art discourse I've seen about biopolitics and stuff, and just a little bit about the pandemic, but there's been surprisingly little change. I mean, the trends kind of toward Canada, especially identity politics, and then figurative painting pretty well everywhere. They didn't dramatically change when things came out. I think there was maybe room for more discussion about art than the commercial or exhibition element of it, because the exhibitions weren't happening.
Right.
But yeah, there's surprisingly little. If I think of an art journal and what was written on COVID, luckily, if you're lucky, maybe one article. So yeah, I mean, contemporaries art is supposed to respond to the times, but it kind of missed out on, for whatever reasons, on this.
Mm. Really? And so with from your seeing, a little change in the pre and post pandemic world, but surely there's been some things happening. If artists can't create and then have exhibits and can't have launches, was there like a backlog that suddenly there's like exhibit to make up for like 3 years of
No,
lockdown?
it's just behind. It's just behind. Like I'm working on a review now of a show in Toronto, and the artist just has a show up now, and it's going to be up, I guess, through, I think through the fall. But it was scheduled originally for 2019. So there's
Wow.
not really a stacking. I mean, because of budgets and things. I mean, a lot of the operations, during the pandemic, uh, were still ongoing. I mean, the administrative parts of it, and hence the budget was being used. So there's not really, I would think, an excess budget for institutions, and they're facing, coming in with declining numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So I would think the budget for kind of stacking more shows and stuff just wouldn't be possible. I think what I'm seeing in general, just as an observer, is it took a while for people to get back sort of into going to public openings or the public element of
Right.
work. And I think in Toronto, at least, where, it's fairly isolated from a lot of the art world, um, just sort of lecture and discussion and that kind of thing, public talks for 3-4 years just left kind of a wide gap. Um, and so forth. So yeah, the whole kind of sense of community, it feels like slowly going back after any kind of trauma of some kind. And now it's sort of back in circuit, but only now it seems. So yeah, it's been
Right.
a almost a stoppage in time.
Truly. To go from a show scheduled for 2019 to finally starting up in 2023, that's it's a long wait. It's a hard wait,
Yeah.
for especially for someone creative, and knowing that we're looking back at where an artist was, and knowing that there's something constantly growing and creating and inside them.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you have a 4-year gap in time, they might be doing something quite different, and the world would have changed. But you've also it's an institutional show, so that means it was probably booked around 2017 or so. So to get all the funding in place, so then you
Yeah.
actually have 6 years. So and then
And
if they're
it's
publishing a catalog and it's late and it takes another year, that 7 years. So it's crazy just how a field that's got the name contemporary, how it's kind of backed up.
right. And the hard work of even getting that funding and somehow having that sustained, because it's not like, okay, you got your funding possibly 2017 for a show for
Mhm.
2019 that didn't happen until 2023, and
Uh,
it's not like, okay, where you just put yourself into into a little time machine and then just zip yourself in between. There's like
yeah.
a lot of dinners to pay for. There's a lot of studio rentals to be paid for, and everything else. Although they're sustaining themselves, and to be ready to go in that one moment, it's incredible. My hat's off to artists surviving through that time and keeping body and soul together
Yeah.
until they could get people walking into their art shows again.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see a little more reflective discourse on that, just because people are, you know, we also saw rents going up and inflation, et cetera, et cetera. It's not a, you know, economically a great time for artists right now. And, you know, I wouldn't mind seeing more discussion and discourse on that, either in politics or within the art community, you know, with the new mayor, et cetera, in Toronto. How are we going to approach the arts and culture? And part of it right now is affordability. So I think that's a key takeaway. And, you know, it affects everything, because when you think of studio costs, rent going up, and
Right.
inflation, people are going to produce smaller work and so forth, and then you get a change in style. That happened in the 80s when rental prices went up,
Really.
and you saw smaller scale work than the big abstract painting in the 60s and stuff. So it has certain effects on that too. And certainly in art education, you wonder, is it going to be kind of a, you know, the people who were attending university during COVID, it's a bit of a challenge in fine arts to teach, obviously. And you just wonder what the impact on that is, sort of a cohort of grads for 1 year, and how that would impact the art world. So yeah, there are all these kind of things that may be yet undiscovered or unknown or whatever. I know, I wouldn't say unknown, but just not maybe thought over in detail.
Well, truly, even seeing that one particular show as one example has a 7-year lifespan to go from
Hmm.
funding to having a person set foot within that exhibit for the first time,
Yeah.
as a result. So we're talking about a possible decade impact just to get to step one of where
Yeah.
some artists left off. And in between, so many other artists still coming up within that decade.
Hmm.
It's going to be very interesting to see if you. I hope you'll research it. I hope I can look forward to you writing a book on it. What that
Yeah, it's
impact
just going to be a
is.
short review, but yeah, in this case. But yeah, it is. Yeah, you kind of wonder, art during COVID, what would be written on, or why it hasn't been documented so much.
Right. Yeah. It is. I think such an important subject as well, because
Yeah,
it would be dreadful to know that creativity would dry up just because people have to switch into survival mode.
yeah,
And
yeah,
as
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it kind of reminds me of when you think of WPA projects during the Depression, and how much sort of the mural funding and stuff made some famous art. You wonder if we didn't underthink how to, you know, if governments didn't underthink how to help culture thrive as well as survive during this, and what could come out of it, etc. So um,
well, Canada did do a good job identifying artists, performing artists, musicians even, where they had CERB for people working in so-called regular jobs, and then what do they have it for? The different title for creative artists who could demonstrate their history of work prior, and then to be
mhm,
eligible to
mhm.
be sustained with a
Yeah,
government issued income.
yeah,
So that
the income was good. I was just thinking maybe there could be some sort of project of art that's responding to, like, you know, the WPA project involved a lot of public mural work, and
right,
um, also so people had work during the Depression. So it's almost like you wonder, the sustainability is good, but you wonder whether, and when I say government, I don't mean government in general, but I mean more arts councils and so forth. Could
mm,
they have perhaps used this to kind of leverage some new production or something?
right.
Uh, or a certain fund through, say, Canada Council, you know, whatever COVID production fund, or so something that would actually make something really positive out of what, you know, has been a pretty difficult experience for a lot of artists.
Of course. But then again, there's that whole question that would come with it immediately is eligibility and narrowing down, into whose hands would that eligibility fall, and the determining who is eligible, and
Yeah,
it's
that
very,
I
very
mean,
complicated.
it's complicated, but
Yeah,
you know, I think most arts councils do have sort of already a plan for eligibility that might not change. I mean, there's certainly a lot of emphasis on funding BIPOC artists and equity and inclusivity and all with DI and stuff now. So I don't think that would have perhaps changed with COVID, but I think the key would have been just to act quickly. that would have maybe been the biggest challenge for bureaucracy, is to respond quickly,
Right.
so forth. So.
Yeah. Well, in the changing world of art, the place we stand right now, it's in the media a lot. The fact that we're in a very, very digital, very electronic influenced age, where actors are on strike, fearing that AI, right, artificial intelligence, will be able to, and has been, fully replacing their performances. Have you noticed with the growth of the availability of digital technologies that these are influencing or changing art that's being created now?
No, I mean, within a very small sector, like there's one artist I know in Montreal whose name I should say his name I'm trying to remember, but she's Beth Frey, that's who it is. She's worked with AI as soon as the basic chatbot came out, and her images got better trained and more interesting, and now they're getting massive attention. And also from the music world, for whatever reasons, doing album cover and then
Okay.
so forth. So there's the odd one like that. But for the most part, contemporary art's a slow process, and when it responds to things, it doesn't respond to everything, I guess. But it's sort of just it's in the background. I mean, there's been more, kind of return to painting the last few years, especially figurative painting, last almost 8 years, that is way more prominent. And there is general art about technology that's also been a trend. So it might be about the internet, it might be about Google, whatever. But as AI in and of itself, no, it's more for marketing and salability and stuff, I think. So it's more in the commercial end of things, it seems. And less perhaps in sort of the quote unquote fine art world or whatever, serious art world, et cetera, et cetera. It hasn't posed such a big thing, and certainly not a threat. I think when new things like this come along for artists who are doing more experimental work than commercial oriented work, their first thought is maybe not that it's a threat, but how can I work with this? This is something new and exciting. And,
Okay.
would not the Impressionists or whatnot, whoever, they have responded to AI perhaps if they were around today. So, yeah, I think if anything, people are either just ignoring it or some are thinking of it as a possibility for creative work, not as a competition with their creative work.
Interesting, because I think, let's say what, 99% of the rest of the world is starting to take a harsher, perhaps more fearful view of the influence of AI and technology, digital technology, being able to dehumanize most other experiences in the workforce and in other types of creativity. So it's interesting that in contemporary art, there seems to be, in your experience, more room for that.
Yeah, I think there's more because it's just not being seen as a threat as it is to actors and stuff. And I think also you're dealing, especially in Canada, where there's not a massive visual art culture, you're dealing with people who aren't making that much money anyway. So, what's being threatened? They're already teaching part-time or something. And so when money isn't an issue or work per se, I don't think there's as much of a threat. I think people just feel for the most part they're going to continue going on with what they've already been doing and what they love and whatever. And so I guess that's perhaps why it's not seen, even like it is in music, for that matter, AI written songs. There's just not such a fear of that.
Technology in creativity and music, for example, has been a problem, I think, even from the 70s, where they realized with different types of synthesizers, etc., and they would say, okay, if you're going to be able to synthesize the sound of a flute, and then that's okay if you're creating it, but when you go into the recording studio, you still have to hire a flautist to play that you cannot just use drum machine and go, that's my drum beat, that when it comes down to the actual recording, then the music unions put their foot down and say, okay, you're going to have to hire a real drummer. You cannot
Right.
just use drum machine when it comes down to doing the recording.
Yeah.
And it evolved that way to protect the artists and their work.
Interesting. Yeah.
But then to say, well, if there are certain digital aspects that can be brought into what you create, it's interesting that if creative artists are not, contemporary artists are not taking up arms on this so much. Interesting to say, okay, well, they already have a smaller income and it's less of an issue for them. But perhaps, if not only to advocate on their behalf, but to say, I think there could be and should be a brighter future for our artists. There should be a brighter future for our artists based on the fact that their creativity is of value. And I think if it can be, I hope not substituted by digital or electronic work, that their input can be protected. I think they have every right to put their foot down and ask for more, I say.
Yeah, it could be. I think, again, there's not perhaps so much of a threat.
Right.
And I think with the musicians example was interesting because there are no artists unions. But yeah, it's just interesting to see how it really is kind of on the sideline.
Right.
And
there are no artists unions yet.
There was briefly one. It just didn't get enough interest in the 80s. I remember people being involved with it. I think they still march in the Labor Day Parade, even though it doesn't exist. A group of people who formed it in the 80s. And so I think it was IAU, Independent Artists Union. But it was hard to get enough interest. And some of the things they were calling for, I mean, were valid. They're based on actress. So, that a self-employed artist could collect unemployment insurance. It was then called unemployment insurance.
Right.
And things like that. So it never really got off the ground, but some of the people that were involved were also involved in getting, public galleries to pay better fees to artists, etc. So, something came out of it, just not the union per se, but it was around for a few years or a few meetings. They made banners and so forth. And like I say, they still march in the Labor Day Parade.
Right. Well, now there's a force, they try to be a force to bring together artists to make sure that their earnings and their work could be protected. And from your view of this, seeing smaller earnings for artists, and that's a smaller earning power that they've become comfortable with or expected, I'm wondering, do you feel then, as art critics, beyond that one step further beyond artists, are they adequately compensated for what they do?
No. I mean, even in the larger newspapers, they're hiring them as freelancers. So there's not an art critic in the Globe and Mail right now, but when there was, they weren't making a lot of money, and they were hired as freelancers, so precarious, no benefits. And then when you water down to the small magazines that pay, $500, $600 an article, you can't make a living. I mean, most art critics work as academics for the most part, or do something publishing related. And some are practicing artists, that's as well, but it is not at all compensated. And I mean, I think I've written on it in the past, and other people have, that perhaps some of the quality of the work would improve were to pay a little more. So yes.
Right. It's funny because that's just the thing, paying a little bit more, getting better quality of the work from art critics. You'd think that would be an automatic yes, especially with something, a big publication like Globe and Mail, like any other major publication anywhere, right? In New York Times, like any of them would say, okay, let's put some money into our art critics and see the fruit of that. But for whatever reason, it just doesn't have the focus and the emphasis at this time.
Yeah, because I think they're sort of in a gray area between academia and being an artist. So people think, well, they're not really artists, we shouldn't fund them. And then if in the visual arts, categories, often again, it's preferred to go to artists. So there is, but yeah, you really do need discourse about it. And I think the granting agencies have gotten better over the years at generally not just art criticism, but any kind of creative nonfiction is considered legit. And therefore people will fund it. So there is some funding available, but just not a lot. And but like I say, also, I mean, it's changes between, print to digital journalism, et cetera, and universality of publications, not focusing as much on local, that there just aren't as much art writing as there used to be in newspapers. So that, I think, it's the shortage of it rather than, as well as the shortage of pay, the shortage of venues, the cutting back. And that has made it just less impact for people writing criticism, and I think less visibility about visual arts in general. There's not a regular art critic in Toronto's major papers or national Post from Toronto, and there even used to be one in the Toronto Sun at one point, which has never been very, contemporary art oriented, and
not terribly highbrow, we know.
Yeah, I do like lowbrow art, but they also had an art writer. So there's nothing now, and with all the excess of the media, visual arts, et cetera, or online, there's plenty of opportunity, I guess, but just not the same visibility that, say, a national critic or a critic in a national paper would not neither the clout nor the visibility that they would have.
Well, truly, seeing that this is an area of, I'd say, growth or regrowth, to have that come back and to have better support in our major publications, something to look forward to. And speaking of contemporary non-fictional writers, I wonder, Earl, as a comparison for yourself and in your experience as a writer, as an art critic, do you have a preference between just pure work as an art critic or purely working as a writer? If the opportunities were there to just select, if you had to choose one for the other, what would you call your preference?
Oh, it would be art writing, because I'm geared to that.
Right.
I mean, the only other area for me is more, I have also journalism background, or somewhat of a journalism background. So the idea of anything journalistic or that style of writing is a valuable to me. But at the end of the day, it's what I'm interested in is art writing. It's a small, kind of tiny, obscure field, but it just sort of suits my interests, it seems. So yeah, definitely I would say art writing.
Well, truly, I'm so interested. I've got so much more to say. At the moment, we are going to take a break to talk about our sponsors and supporters, and then we'll be back with more talk about art critics, and writing with Earl Miller on CooLife Podcast. Those lonely days of lockdowns and isolation are gone for good. Go to www.therealthingdating.com. That's www.therealthingdating.com. It's time to share. Share your time, share your life, share your love. www.therealthingdating.com. Join for free. Upgrade at any time, starting at just $5.99 a month. www.therealthingdating.com. Because it's time. You're listening to the CooLife Podcast. We'll be back in 3, 2, 1. And we are back on CooLife Podcast with our guest, Earl Miller, art critic and writer. And Earl, I wonder, in the years that you've worked as an art critic, as a writer, can you tell me, is there a single piece of art that you found to be like the most bizarre, whether it was a piece of art or an art installation over the years?
Yeah, bizarre. I mean, I think by this stage in contemporary art, nothing is truly shocking. Um, but in some ways, some of the more kind of bizarre ones are student-y performances or exhibitions where people are sort of trying out new things and stuff. But yeah, I find it hard to really pin down a particular one. I think some things that are kind of living art maybe would fall into the kind of the bizarre or unusual or extraordinary. But I can think of one artist named Laura Cacauca who lives in Meaford with her partner, and she's pretty well just collected an incredible array of junk store kitsch and secondhand stuff and arranged it in such a way like she has a white room, et cetera, and it's just filled with stuff. And I thought that the idea of sort of a farmhouse, which calls a funny farm, being like that and just living in it was kind of, for me, an eccentricity that I thought was one of the ones that stood out for sure.
Right. It's quite a commitment to live in the environment of the art piece.
Yeah,
So,
it is, and it's constantly growing and so forth, and as one is as well as the artist. But and then I think just some the esoteric or things that are just bizarre, things you can't quite figure out, like a woman, and I can't remember the name of the video, but in a chicken costume laying an egg and stuff like that. And
right.
you can't quite figure out what odd things can seem quite rational and logical if there's meaning behind them. But if you're kind of head scratching, yeah, you get the odd one like that as well, too.
Right, right. Now, I remember there used to be a time when you'd hear about these environmental installations that would be on a huge scale, sometimes
Hmm.
taking up acres and acres. I think there was one in Australia that looked like a bunch of red sails, and it was on the ocean, and you
Uh-huh.
even needed to like fly over it in a helicopter. And I mean, do you feel that when you hear about these large scale installations that are environmental sequences, etc., do you consider those to still be art at that
I'm
point?
not sure whether it still be art, but they're definitely not part of the current discourse because there is a challenging of kind of seminal works of that kind. Um, One famous one, that would be, I think, it would be around 1972, I think, but Spiral Jetty by Robert Smithson, where he basically sort of built a jetty, well, shaped spirally by rocks and sand and whatnot. And so for that, looking at it now, many people may see it as an imposition on the land rather than
Mm,
working with the land.
right,
And the current discourse is maybe asking also an environmental awareness in the work rather than an addition. I mean, to me, maybe because I'm of an earlier generation, that is fine. I think it draws attention to the environment, the land, and we are meddlers anyway. And realistically, we are changing things. But I mean, if it takes up space and is damaging to the environment, I think that that's a different issue. But yeah, there is a discourse of not doing things to the planet, but letting the planet do things itself in art. And so that work does seem and is under kind of scrutiny. Some of it also would be, that the land is originally indigenous land and that sort of thing. So is it interfering with that?
right,
And that, say, if someone's doing a project who's British in India, is it referencing colonialism? Um, that was a piece involving an artist walking, but at the same time, it's valid to environmental art because the same questions could be asked on where your site is.
right.
And so there's a lot of discussion around, maybe more of the ethics or post-colonialism and stuff. So it's a much different discourse. I mean, much of the environmental art that was produced then would not be produced now. Um,
True.
yet,
True.
yet I think it's certainly valid as art, and some of it, like Walter de Maria's lightning field, is a famous one, and it's a series of lightning rods. And when lightning hits, it hits a number of them, so it lights up like however many, 50, whatever,
Wow.
and it creates a powerful view. At the same time, it's so popular that they've got kind of boutique hotels around it and regular tourists, etc. And it takes money to, it costs significant money to get there. And it's become, as much of it as it was originally a public work, just to be sort of randomly encountered. It's now exclusive. So, it's a beautiful piece, but all of the context around it sets up some, it problematizes it in terms of discussing it and whatnot. So yeah, it's a good question. Are they art? Yeah. Are they part of the current discourse? Perhaps not as much.
Mhm.
Yet they're still influencing. Without it, no one would be addressing, I don't think, environmental art right now. They were the forerunners. So,
Right.
that's valid to be considered as well.
I know that in all the different trends and things that you've been able to witness in your career, have you found a favorite artist that you like to come back to and see their growth over time?
It's hard to have a single favorite artist. I mean, I have a group of artists, I think, more than a favorite. There just isn't one for me. I suppose in painting, it would probably be Manet or etc. Contemporary, then there'll be one, postmodern, whatever. But it's more kind of a group of 10, 15 than one. It's I know the art world now loves top 10 lists, but it's not something that I would give a top one easily.
Interesting. Okay. Now, I wonder, would you say that you see value still in art? Is art truly a necessity? After all, we've come through a pandemic, huge economic change. There's a global crisis with the supply chain. That some basic goods can't even get delivered the way they did just a few years ago. Do you think art through all of this is still a necessity?
Well, I think it should be. I'm still of the school that we need the, spiritual and intellectual aesthetic components of art to function as living, cultured human beings, and our lives will be impoverished without it. That may not be the case for everybody, but for those who feel that way, yeah, it is absolutely needed. Is it useful in a utilitarian way? No. And I think the further we get away from that and its commodification, the better. But sure, I mean, but many people, and I think including in the art world too, are in this mode where there are so many things are more important than art that it's not considered essential. Like the climate change activists who've been spray painting, classical paintings and stuff. So
Oh my God.
there's an argument, of course, that their argument was that with the climate crisis, art isn't important, and I would disagree and say that we need that. It's that kind of humanity, the arts and humanities, that will encourage people toward environmental protection. If you have this kind of new Puritanism where you get rid of that human element, I think we're going to see more of the kind of destruction. We don't value humanity, we don't value beauty, we don't value nature. We're hardly going to do as much about the environment until, it immediately affects our livelihood and that sort of thing. So yeah, to me it's an absolute necessity. And I think for a good amount of people was a coping mechanism through COVID, if nothing else.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And you're right, it is pretty shocking what was being done by the those environmentalists. I mean, that those a lot of people witnessing that thought those were acts of terrorism, acts of violence, acts of vandalism, to use a crime to support a cause. It's heartbreaking because then you make a permanent change, a permanent damage to art to make to basically be an advertisement for a cause. It's that is pretty heartbreaking. But interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. That it does even more support the necessity of art. I wonder if through this again, your experience as an art critic, are art critics necessary?
At this stage, probably not. I would like them to be again, but probably not. The idea of, again, as I was saying about the dearth of art journalism or art writing, has granted less power. And I think in general, the way maybe since year 2000, or maybe even since the 80s, the art world has become more commodified. And the role of a critic as being able to evaluate and judge and thus determine an artist's career has been in some ways co-opted by, auction houses or collectors buying directly out of grad programs like Yale, CalArts, and then they buy it, so it inflates the prices, et cetera, et cetera. So you're seeing maybe more collectors or art consultants impacting how things are than art critics. So I think it's Art in America, but whatever the case, it's merged with Art News, one of the other big art publications, but they list the top 200 influential people in the art world, and other publications do as well. And usually in the top 10, it used to be there was one critic or something, and then often Jerry Sauls, who's the New York Magazine critic, is on the top 10, 20 or whatever, and they're disappearing. So yeah, they're not really necessary. I still think written discussion is necessary to fully grasp art. It's always been surrounded with that. But right now, if you consider necessity in utilitarian or in terms of clout or power or whatever, they don't have it. It's not just a thing. And in a country like Canada, that the art world is largely governmentally funded, I mean, in some ways, probably a grant officer or curators of public galleries would have much more power than an art.
My goodness. Oh, truly. That's a little bit sad. I understand the necessity of the role, but to say that, that role that gives them more power than an actual art critic. Well, I'd say you're gonna have to find a way to skew that value, I hope.
Yeah, no, it would be nice to see that evaluation in and of itself does come back into, determining what work is good, helping people's careers, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, it would be good. But yeah, the current climate in two different ways in Canada, government run bureaucracy, and then in other, of the G7 countries, the art market for the most part, or some of the G7 countries, and in Germany, et cetera, France, United States. I mean, it's market based. There's a huge market, and then countries like the States that have a huge market often don't have great funding. So, when the market it's the people who do have the money that are determining how things run. So yeah, it's a shame. On the other hand, there are certainly more people writing about art than ever. There's tons of master's programs, and with blogs and small publications, it's pretty possible to get out there. So it's maybe more widespread, but not as influential as it once was.
And an interesting view from your part. It's definitely something that I would hope would have changed in the near future.
That would be nice.
Standing here to support art critics wherever you all are, including and starting with EARL Miller. So,
thank you. Yes.
Right now, we're going to take another break to talk about our sponsors and supporters, and then we'll be back with more Art Talk with art critic EARL Miller on CooLife Podcast. Those lonely days of lockdowns and isolation are gone for good. Go to www.therealthingdating.com. That's www.therealthingdating.com. It's time to share. Share your time, share your life, share your love. www.therealthingdating.com. Join for free. Upgrade at any time, starting at just $5.99 a month. www.therealthingdating.com. Because it's time. This is CooLife Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to CooLife on your streaming service and on YouTube as Hellenique Today. That's HELENIQUE Today. Because that helps us to bring more cool stuff to your ears. You're listening to the CooLife Podcast. We'll be right back. We are back at CooLife Podcast in our discussion with Earl Miller, art critic and writer. And Earl, I know that your background, you are educated in art, in literature, in journalism, and there are a lot of art critics who are called art critics, who are respected, but they do not actually have that education, and some have no higher education. Do you feel that their contributions are actually still valid without that degree and that deeper knowledge and learning?
Well, it's a bit different situation than that, and that I think right now, as I was saying a while ago, there's so many of these master's programs in art criticism and curating that probably most people have further education than I do, rather than less. But you do get people who perhaps came from an academic field other than art, and ended up art writing. And for me, and there's also people come most often from art history, and they may not be completely visual people. So I think it's great that there are art writers, and some of my favorite ones tend to also be painters or artists, or have that background,
Right.
or and are a little bit more visual. So I think the biggest problem may be someone who's not, may have a PhD, but it's not necessarily in the right field, or just simply not visual. And I think it goes back, going back in time, early 20th century, the artists could often draw. And, some of the more modernist critics, his work's now very dated, but Robert Hughes came from a painting background, et cetera, and did always put a visual element to things for sure, or formalist element. So yeah, I do find, I also find people who have an art degree, perhaps, whether it's undergrad or grad, doesn't matter, as opposed to, say, a history degree of some kind, art or otherwise,
Yeah.
are often quite creative and lend naturally into writing. A lot of artists write, I guess, and is what I'm saying, and that's important too. But I think hardcore sort of academic writing is important too. It's nice to have kind of both schools. And in an ideal world, someone who could write at an advanced academic level but is also visual would be perfect.
Of course. I think that's you, right?
I don't know whether it's anybody, because when you think of what you actually have to do to get everything, each critic's going to have their own, but a lot of it's philosophically based in art theory. So, a degree of some kind in philosophy, perhaps a higher level post-grad degree or something, or an advanced degree, at least an undergrad in art history, some fine art. And when you think of combining all of that, and then with journalism, that would be the perfect writer.
Right.
But there are certainly few and far between, if any, in that position.
Right.
But
well, now, not that I want you to defend him or stand up for him, but just interesting, you did mention earlier Jerry Saltz, art critic with New York Magazine, who would possibly regularly attain a top 10 listing of most influential in the art world. However, he's completely uneducated, actually no degrees. At one point, drove
Yeah,
truck for a while.
yes, he did drive a truck. Yeah.
And yet, you know,
He's an art school dropout.
he's
So he did study art. He might have been a graduate. I'd have to check. I think he was a dropout, but he dropped out of making art for sure. But I know he went to the Art Institute of Chicago. And then for years he drove a truck. I think he was kind of struggling at an artist first. When he switched to writing on art, I don't know. But his wife is also the critic for New York Times. So kind of an art writing couple.
yes.
And he was for a long time with the Village Voice. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting with him because he often offers advice to artists. And in one way, it's valid because he's an esteemed art critic and kind of a populist art critic. And then on the other hand, he didn't succeed as an artist and he's giving advice. And it does, I mean, it's an interesting case in point of just, you know, how much art writing is a gap between the actual art.
Right.
Or
And
the practice of art. Yeah.
but I mean, just on the side of logic, you know, just like, can someone be a marriage counselor having never been in a marriage or understood being in a relationship? And it's like he's consulting people effectively, but interesting that he's not educated.
Yeah, or educated in the conventional way for that, and did come from a lot of sort of odd jobs. I mean, he writes as a populist, and that's why some people in the art world dismiss some of his work. But I think that's part of, you know, also what makes him valid and has a following. I mean, he also, you know, outside of making top 10 at some points, he won a Pulitzer Prize. So there's the journalist end, which he's obviously very good at.
Oh, that's hard to knock someone after they win a Pulitzer to say that they don't know what they're talking about in journalism. So kudos to him. I just found it interesting since you had mentioned his name, and he is a unique situation as far as education background. And, you know, being an art critic, you've seen, you know, there are times it's a huge influence on the art world. It can be. Have you ever discovered that you were impressed with a certain artist, maybe wrote well about their work, only to discover later on in their career that they never really quite lived up to their beginning?
I'd have to think back because I often write about established artists. I don't write that much about younger artists. When I do, I'm usually pretty good at guessing who is going to be successful. But often I find I'm good at guessing who's going to be successful internationally, and that's not always the case in Canada. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I can't think offhand of someone who didn't. Well, I guess I can't even remember the artist's name. I remember writing on one artist's work, and it just never kind of went anywhere. Yeah, I'd have to actually look back at the name, but
oh, that's okay.
I'm not sure whether I'd want to bring it up anyway.
No, we don't want to shame them.
Yeah, without really explaining why, for sure. That's the other thing. But
let them flip their burgers in peace, right?
Whatever they're doing. Yeah. You do wonder. But for the most part, yeah, there haven't been that so many. But it is funny because I know when kind of the Globe and Mail critic in the 80s and I think early 90s, John Bentley Mays, the late John Bentley Mays, often was wrong in his choices and notorious for that. And just because he would, I mean, I guess he would take leaps and so forth and see potential in things, but a lot of cases it didn't really necessarily develop. But other people, I guess, have a good eye, or other people like Jerry Saltz simply have the power that they can make somebody, or he did at one point. And that's another case too. So, you know, they would meet your expectations because you helped make them come true, you know, yeah.
Well, I guess a lot like Oprah when she'd have her little book talks back in the day on her show, and if she brought somebody's book up and they talked about it in her little book group, that just basically made their career, would next day it would just sell out worldwide. And I mean,
Hmm.
it can happen with an art critic, just
Well,
takes.
yeah, I think you need someone like Oprah who would be interested in contemporary art, but it is often, like I was saying, prominent collectors, and then
Right.
people say, "Hey, such and such bought them," like the Rebels bought the work, and it's going to go up in value. So the next tier collectors buys the work, all of that.
Do you think that's too much power for an art critic that can give a certain type of endorsement that would basically make a career?
If they're a good critic, I think it's a great thing. And I mean, there are multiple voices too now. So, especially with art centers not just being located in one place. I mean, you've got
Mhm.
LA, Berlin, London, Paris, New York.
True.
So there are a lot of voices. So I don't really see that as a problem. I think it's a good thing if it's a good critic. If it's obviously a poor gatekeeper, that's an issue. But it also, there has to be a string of people respecting the critic too. So, Museum A says, "Hey, we're going to show the artist's work." Gallery A says, "We're going to show it." Gallery B, whatever. So there also has to be a string that goes beyond that. But I think and then someone could say, "Oh, are they too powerful and not right in their judging? Are they nepotistic?" And there's checks and balances after. So, yeah, I do think it's a good thing to have critics have that kind of cloud again. It's certainly better than the market. Nothing else, I think.
Oh. Well, I mean, the fact that an artist can just change your life with the right kind of art critic taking note of their work.
Hmm.
So, it can be life changing. And have you ever found that you were able to influence the outcome of an artist's career over the years, just with your, for better or worse? With your
Well, I write for smaller publications, and so maybe it's a cumulative. Certainly, reviews will help.
work?
Um, but have I really kind of launched? No. Have I helped? Yeah. And I mean, also in terms of writing, I have maybe not the last few years, but for a long time, I wrote regularly museum and art gallery catalog essays, and
Mhm.
that is crucial, especially in a grant-oriented country like Canada,
Right, of
to have
course.
publications about your work. So I think more than anything, perhaps I've had a blanket influence on a number of people, you know, that are small influences, but widespread over a
Mhm.
number of people, I think. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Now, for the trends that you've seen coming up in contemporary art and other types of
Hmm.
art, what do you feel might be next on the horizon in the world of art?
I'm not sure. I mean, it tends to be if you use historic trends, we're in a period of figurative painting, as I mentioned a couple of times. So often figuration switches between abstractions. So that's one possibility. Um, Another possibility, I think, too, is often painting goes through a period where it's very prominent, which it has, and
Right.
then it goes into more, you know, perhaps experimental work, conceptual work, video, etc. So there could be a swing like that. I think to me, a lot of it is going to depend on the 2024 election in the States and some of these
Wow, really?
matters happening around the world. Because I mean, maybe COVID didn't affect the art world, but the Trump election, George Floyd killing, et cetera, had significant impacts. And so I think also where it's going depends on a couple of key factors. And then over the years, like where the environment is going too. I mean, in certain cities, I remember being at a conference in Miami, and it seemed the majority of the art talk was about the environment because people were incredibly nervous there with their proximity to, global warming, water levels rising,
Right.
etc.
Yeah,
So
yeah. They're
in a
seeing
flat,
it.
yeah, they said so they were seeing kind of the first a little more frontline,
Yeah. Wow.
and now I guess with the Canadian wildfires, etc. So I think those things might have major factors. And other things, I think things tend to work in opposition. So we've had a lot of work about ethics et cetera, et cetera, are we going to get into more sort of a decadent period? A lot of work in the early 90s, late 80s dealing with sexuality, also dealing with AIDS activism too. But are we going to get more into a period of kind of transgressiveness like in the 80s, 90s, or that's going away from kind of, I think, what these days is maybe focused more on academia, on ethics and morals, and get more into kind of raw work or challenging work rather than work about equity per se.
Right.
So yeah, I wonder too. Again, things tend to work in opposition. So the next trend will be quite directly different than the current one. So other than guessing at things like that, there's not too much I can say. The trick is really looking at what younger artists or art students are doing now, and
Okay.
that could be a strong indicator if you see sort of patterns and that sort of thing as well.
We'll have to watch and see if
Yeah.
some of your musings on the future of art.
Well, they're very broad ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any soothsayer knows. That's how you stay accurate, is to be broad, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's what I'm trying to do. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good advice, I think, from the soothsayers.
Truly a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Earl, for joining
Thank you.
us
This
for
is
our
lovely
talk.
to be able to talk about this.
I hope we're going to be able to do that again real soon. And so I am really looking forward to that, but I've thoroughly enjoyed our talk.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being available for this. And our thanks to Earl Miller, art critic and writer, for being with us here on CooLife Podcast. Until next time, I'm Eva John. Bye now. And that was our show. Thank you for listening to the very end. Please remember to subscribe through your streaming service to get more access to our guest interviews. Also, please subscribe on YouTube to help support our podcast. Until next time, I'm Eva John for CooLife Podcast. Thank you for turning me on.